philosophical questions arise from something. They always arise from something, and it's almost always important to ask yourself, where do they arise from? Why would you ask that question? Where does it come from? Once you study history and you become aware of the historical nature and the contextual nature of the categories that you're using, that recognition in itself will change your attitude toward the world and toward yourself and toward your own life and toward other people's lives. And it will change it in a number of different ways. One way in which it will change it is it will prevent you from identifying in too fanatical a way with one particular category rather than another. I've always been very keen on getting away from the idea that the world is structured around yes and no, or good and evil, or true and false. I've always thought that the model for a human life should not be a life in which I have the good categories, the truth. The model should be the model of a life which is more enlightened. Enlightenment is a category that doesn't have that yes or no structure. It's a question of degrees. As human beings, we naturally have expectations about the world. That's the sort of creatures we are. We value certain things more than others. We have expectations about them. But they're demands we are putting on the world, and to adopt the religious view which says that you should change that focus and not look at the demands we're making at the world, but look at the way the world is inherently structured, that's the basic mistake. It's both not the case that the world is set up so as to be good for us, and it's also the case that the world is not set up so as to frustrate us, because both of them make the assumption that there is such a thing as the way the world is, and the way the world is somehow inherently teleologically structured. If we find the world not in order, one of the things we should reflect on is, what sort of order would we be expecting? I mean, why are we dissatisfied with it? What are we? I'm only dissatisfied if I have another expectation. If I assume that when I step on my bicycle is going to go forward, then I will be disappointed if instead of that it explodes. But if I don't have that assumption, I won't be surprised, and I won't be upset by that. If you mean by human flourishing having enough to eat, having a reasonable family life, being able to survive to a rather old age, if that's what human flourishing is, then we do a pretty good job of it in most of the Western world. The difficulty is that the notion of human flourishing too changes over time. Ancient Greek serfs didn't ask themselves whether their work was meaningful in any sense. They were trying to get through to the end of the next day. They were worried that famine was going to wipe them out. They were worried that the corn wasn't going to come up the next year. So I think it's really important, again, I don't have a patent answer to this, but I think it's really important, again, not to think that, as it were, human flourishing is an ahistorical category, because partly we're so dissatisfied with the world because we're making demands on it that are much more extensive than the demands that many of our predecessors made on it. Herbert Marcuse talked about one-dimensional man, and I think it's terribly important for philosophy to keep alive the possibilities of thinking differently. Foucault says something to penser autrement, the possibilities of thinking differently about things, and the possibility that we might be very different from what we are now. And therefore I see philosophy as very, very strongly continuous with the imagination, rather than, as I think most philosophers do, very continuous with the powers of reasoning. The powers of reasoning are terribly important. I don't mean to denigrate them at all, but as it were, reason and science are one thing, and the things I'm interested in are not actually reasoning, not so much reasoning and science, but keeping a space for free reflection on the lives we're living and the lives we might live or could live.